What's up, Chris Tucker? It's your boy, Jack Slack, coming at you on Friday, and we're going to do this real quick because I recorded 30 minutes of absolute gold on this dog shit main event yesterday, and then I realised that the microphone wasn't attached correctly, and I was fucking livid. So, we're going to go through this quick because there isn't going to be a lot of time for people to consume it anyway. Consume my expertise. Plugs up front, if you haven't read it already. Advanced Striking 2.0 Dustin Poirier is up. Talks all about his hillbilly shoulder roll. I'm well aware there are no hills in Louisiana, but I've already said it like 20 times. Talks about the shift, how he uses the shift, how he changed the shift to fool McGregor, and all that other good stuff. You know, if you like Dustin Poirier's weird-ass striking, and you like me pontificating about it with scribbly doodles, that's your article. Go read it. If you haven't watched the new Filthy Casuals Guide to Muslim Salakov, which came out a couple of days ago, go watch that. It's not a fan favourite. He's not a fan favourite. So it's not going to get very high views. So please go and pump those numbers for me. The UFC are shorting my content, and I need you to, be a retarded ape and push it to the moon. Anyway, let's talk about this bullshit event that I've talked about once already, and I'll try and be half as funny. It was alchemy to get as much good stuff out of the main event as I did, and I'm going to try and re-alchemy right now. Jairzinho Rozenstruik versus Augusto Sakai. Despite my better judgment, I actually quite like Augusto Sakai. Oh, my pun in the original recording was the Augusto Sakai of Coming in Your Eye, but I forgot to say it this time. Despite my better judgment, I quite like him. From that Overeem fight, I really liked the little step-up front kicks he was digging to Overeem's body. I liked the sort of flurries he was putting together on the fence. He did also, however, lose by pounding an unresisting Overeem to the point that he was gassed. So that was kind of disappointing. Plus, split decisions over Andrei Arlovski and Blagoy Ivanov, not very impressive. Meanwhile, Jairzinho Rozenstruik, every fighter is underpaid in the UFC. You know, no matter how you want to frame it, the percentage that goes to the fighters is embarrassing. However, Jairzinho Rozenstruik is overpaid. It's not, but oh my god, his last few. Well, actually, he did knock out the ghost of Junior Dos Santos a few months back, but the Cyril Gane one, the Alistair Overeem one, basically after that little run of when he came into the UFC, Junior Albini, Alan Crowder, Andrei Arlovski, he hit them all with the same little check hook as they came in, which is really embarrassing for Arlovski because he watched the guy do it twice and then still ran in face first. But yeah, he caught them all with little counters. Then he met Overeem. Overeem fought southpaw, checked his lead hand the entire time. Jairzinho Rozenstruik couldn't do anything useful. Finally, just by actually attacking in the fifth round, he managed to scrape a win by the skin of his teeth. As much Alistair Overeem snatching defeat from the jaws of victory as Rozenstruik doing anything useful, to be honest. Then he got sparked by Ngannou in 20 seconds in the most embarrassing fight in the history of the heavyweight division, possibly. Beat Dos Santos. Then he fought Cyril Gane for runner-up of most embarrassing fight. Because Gane was working. He wasn't working as much as he probably should have, but he was working the entire time. Rozenstruik did nothing. Rozenstruik just waited for counters that he never actually attempted. Now, knowing our luck, I'm going to have slagged off Rozenstruik's fighting style, and he's going to knock out Augusto Sakai in the first round. But it was incredibly frustrating. Like, that seems to be who Rozenstruik is. If he's in front of a dangerous striker, he will counter to a fault. And if you shut down his lead hand, he's even worse off. However, he could fight the same fight that Alistair Overeem did, just cover up and let Sakai come onto him, and Sakai will oblige him and, offer him up those counters. So there's some intrigue there. I just don't want people, if he scores the knockout here, being like, well, the Cyril Gane and Alistair Overeem fights were clearly a fluke. This guy is super exciting. But I'm not going to go into that too much further because I honestly, you don't care, I don't care. It's not a great main event. The heavyweight fights on this card are kind of rubbish. The good stuff is further down. We got we'll go with my Filthy Casuals guide. We had Muslim Salakov versus Francisco Trinaldo. Now Muslim Salakov's getting long in the tooth. He's 37 years old. But Francisco Trinaldo, brace yourself, he's 42. And I was driving around earlier thinking about this. Not just because like I heard it and I was like, I need to go for a drive, and I'm looking out the window into the rain, being like, I don't understand. But no, I was driving around earlier and I was just like, we all accept that Francisco Trinaldo is an old man, and that's awesome. But to be 42 and competitive in the UFC lightweight division is insane. You know, it's no secret that I love Trinaldo, but and that I think he's underappreciated and will always be underappreciated. But that stat in particular, I think, will never get as much attention as it should. Like, how is this old man still battering world-class lightweights? And he's on a great run of 3. I think it was Jai Herbert, the horrible knockout that Herb Dean still defends as a great stoppage. Bobby Green, and then someone else. But he's on a little run of 3. But he's now going up to welterweight, which I couldn't find the last time he did it. He probably has at some point. But that's one of the downsides of aging. It gets fucking hard to dehydrate yourself the entire time. It could be that. It could be that, like, he gets constipated and he's like, I need more prune juice in my diet. But Salakov actually is an established welterweight. He's been fighting there his whole career. I was following Salakov back in like 2013, 2014 when I was, Kung Lee was either on the ups or just moving into MMA. I was very excited about Sanshao guys. At some point, China just conspired to start calling it Sanda instead of Sanshao and pretending that they never did call it Sanshao. But I'm here with Kung Lee's book that literally says Sanshao on the cover. But I was really interested in that whole scene. And of course, it was very much like an amateur sport in China. And Salakov was a name that kept coming up because obviously he, 2014 he wasn't 5-time King of Sanda, but he was getting there. And the Sanda World Championships happens biennially, so that's once every 2 years, like ADCC, and he won 5 of them, which is incredible. So I was very excited for him to come to MMA, and I remember at the time being like, oh, he's had 2 fights and he's not really getting through them at any decent rate. Normally these guys start their career with like 3 or 4 fights in a year, and then when they start having to take the opponents more seriously, they slow it down. But Salakov was very slow build right from the beginning. But then suddenly ends up in the UFC, and he's a very interesting sort of striker. In fact, that's one of the weird parts about him is that he really, Sanda, a lot of Sanda is throwing flashy kicks, catching kicks, and hitting beautiful dumps. If you watch, if you even watch like Buakaw versus, is it Li Yong, the fake monk? But Li Yong was a guy with some Sanda background, and you can see it from the weird kick catches to trips he does. You catch the kick and you step really deep and do like a very artistic throw, or you catch the kick and you swing it all the way down to the floor and back up and put the guy on his ass. They're very distinct from the usual sort of dumps you see in Muay Thai. I imagine most of them are legal. There's a lot of stuff that isn't legal in Muay Thai, like there's a lot of pickups below the waist. Like Kung Lee, they just used to, in the US when he was fighting Sanshao bouts, they'd just find him a kickboxer who'd never done Sanshao, and he'd double-leg them because he was a wrestler in high school. But obviously, if you're not great on the ground, and Muslim Salakov is not great on the ground, there's not really a lot of point to dumping people. So he'll occasionally do it, but it's like not a focus of his game as it was in actual Sanda competition. So what he's turned into is this weird sort of like very cautious counter-striker. And if you haven't watched the Filthy Casual's Guide, it's basically me getting livid that all he does is shoulder feint the jab and then retreat, and he never actually throws the jab. I went through all his fights in the UFC, I couldn't find a single good clip of him committing to a jab and establishing it. Now, knowing my luck, he does that in this fight, which would be even weirder because Trinaldo's a southpaw who hand fights a lot. But it's really obvious once you notice it. And Zaleski, should have won that fight in his last one. And basically he quote unquote won. In my eyes, he won that fight by basically just waiting Salakov out. Salakov kept having to get closer. He's close enough to like actually jab this guy on the nose with just the extension of the arm, and he still won't do it because he's so concerned about jumping backwards as soon as Zaleski comes at him. But I think this is a really fun fight, partly because a lot of it is going to come down to how Trinaldo's strength moves up, because he's we talk about old man strength, but even when he was a younger man, very strong dude. Like his takedowns are just like over under body lock, outside reap along the fence. Basic stuff, but jammed down people's throats. Also, his favorite counters on the feet are like the big left hand over the top of the opponent's right, but I don't know if you can get Salakov to actually commit to that or commit to leading. But I'm very interested to see if Trinaldo can back him up, put him on the cage, and just give him a nasty cage wrestling lesson. because Salakov, his worst fights have been ones where he gets taken down, like his very first one in the UFC. I mean, to be fair, the Zaleski one, he didn't get taken down. That was just his opponent waited him out, and he didn't really have that much on the lead. For Salakov, honestly, like a lower pace fight could actually benefit him if Trinaldo's not pushing him to the fence and making him work. Trinaldo, even in that Jai Herbert fight, was very low output for most of the fight. And Salakov is also very low output. He lands his spin kicks when he thinks the opponent's not like reacting to his feints. And that's how he picks up some points. But it really, both of them, the more I think about this, the more this could be just a dire fight of them both staring at each other. But for who they are and their skill sets, I'm very intrigued. What else is good? Alon Patrick versus Mason Jones. Alon Patrick, I used to have laughing fits when he did striking, because he's really good on the ground, but he'd like take a run up into every punch or two that he threw, and he's so gangly for the weight that it looks really weird. But he actually looked pretty sharp in his last couple on the feet. Had a lot of trouble with Scott Holtzman. That was partly because he couldn't take him down, because Holtzman's pretty good at stuffing the takedowns. Mason Jones, got the same sort of like fanfare that McGregor did because he had similar feats. He'd won the lightweight and welterweight titles in Cage Warriors rather than the featherweight and lightweight titles. But definitely not like the defensively difficult to hit fighter that McGregor was a lot of the time. Not nearly as elusive. He can crack, but he's really there for his opponents. He's much more of a flat-nosed brawler. And his fight with Mike Davis, while being like fight of the night, was a very painful lesson. And he did lose that, to be fair, so he probably did learn from it. I was worried he'd win it and then be like, yeah, I'll just keep doing more of that. But yeah, I mean, they kicked 7 bells out of each other in that one. The bodywork was big for Davis, and while he went to a lot, and Patrick doesn't do that much. Patrick has a really good left kick to the body. Mason Jones, excellent left hook, and the way that Patrick always reaches with his lead hand and sort of sticks his chin out when he throws his left hand could make him a sucker for that. Interested to see how Mason Jones' takedown defense looks, because Patrick is very good on the ground, not so great at taking people down. And Mason Jones, I think before he was a knockout artist, he was known as a judoka. So very interested to see how that plays out. I think that's a good sort of level of competition for Jones, though, because that Mike Davis fight, not a superstar coming in, but still a very hard fight. So bump him down a bit, have Alon Patrick. He's still a young guy, still growing, still learning. Not everyone can come in already a superstar. Yusuf Zalal versus Sean Woodson should be fun. Woodson, obviously one of the most alien physiques in MMA. So tall for featherweight. 6'2" and an 80-inch reach almost. Versus Zalal, who I consider quite a gangly featherweight, but he's 5'10" and has a 75-inch reach. So, no matter who you are, the extreme of Sean Woodson's physique is always going to mean you're fighting at a length and height disadvantage. But Woodson coming off that loss to Julian Erosa, the first of his career. And Zalal's had a couple of bad ones. He lost to Ilia Topuria and Seung Woo Choi after what was a flying start in the UFC. It was Austin Lingo, Jordan Griffin, Peter Barrett. Everyone and their mum was sharing gifs of him doing flying knees and spin kicks and shit. And then the hype just sort of died a death. It was kind of like Ankalaev. Just everyone was hype on him. He lost one, and then everyone was like, I don't care anymore. It was not like, he just needs to change some things. Still got promise. What else is good? I mean, Tanabosa versus Latifi will be, fun enough. I mean, Tanabosa got sort of the knockout artist rub, even though it turns out he isn't really that very consistently. And I thought Ilia Latifi was retired, but, it's heavyweight MMA. What are you going to do? Makwan Amakani's taking on some guy who I've never heard of and is 11-4, but he's the number one lightweight in Arizona, and Arizona has some good gyms, so, won't count him out. But he was due to fight, Amakani was due to fight Nate Landwehr, and Landwehr got injured. Honestly, might have ended up with a harder fight out of that, because Nate Landwehr has, an okay record in spite of being one of the sloppiest fighters I've ever seen. Tom Breeze is back versus Antonio Arroyo. Fun enough. Dusko Todorovic, really like him. Fun, like, kickboxing into takedown attempts. Sticks his head out there a bit, like he'll slip punches and duck punches, but he does sort of like leave his head undefended and linger, which can be problematic for him. But he's fighting, again, another guy, no UFC fights. Was Todorovic previously booked to fight someone else? Yes, Maki Pitolo, there we go. Yes, I remember Todorovic's last one. He lost to Soriano in that fight. I almost called exactly, actually, because I was like, Soriano has this wide left southpaw swing, and Todorovic will hit people and then sort of linger, and it'll either be Todorovic beating him up and almost getting caught, or Todorovic getting caught and knocked out of that. That was a really interesting little matchup. I'm not trying to make myself out to be clairvoyant there. I just thought it was really interesting because Soriano really only has that one thing, and Dusko Todorovic has this sort of glaring weakness that hadn't really got him into trouble that badly up until that point. Santiago Ponzinibbio versus Miguel Baeza. That's interesting because everyone's hot on Baeza right now. He's on a good streak of wins, couple of knockouts in there. Ponzinibbio, looked incredible against Neil Magny. He didn't people were not that keen on him because he gouged the shit out of Gunnar Nelson's eye. But the one against Neil Magny was astounding. Neil Magny kept clutching his eye, and then they show the replay, and Ponzinibbio had just punched him in it. Like, his jab was so on point against a guy with a reach and height advantage who is also known for his jab. So remarkable fight from Ponzinibbio there. And then he got like a blood infection or some shit and was out for ages. Comes back against the Leech, Jing Liang, and just looked slow. And the real question here, he got caught with his chin up and got knocked out in that one. The real question here is, was that ring rust? Or was that physical decline? And I suppose Baeza is a good guy to tell us that because he's fast, got good boxing, lots of being likened to Jorge Masvidal. Partly it seems like he's sort of grooming himself into that sort of role, but also the douchey Brazilian beard thing, Brazilian wax beard, and also like the upright sort of boxing style. He's very smooth. I like him a lot. I think that's a really good fight. That's Ponzinibbio, he could be Kevin Randleman levels of like unachieved potential for me. And I know, Kevin Randleman won a UFC title, but he won it after it was twice vacated. And he won it from P.T. Williams. And to be honest, his game just never got, not even for that time period, his game never got to the point that it should have. He was taking shots from miles out, just stuff even then, people realized that you needed to like jab and shoot at the bare minimum. And he was getting by on this amazing athleticism. But if he had any kind of quality training, Randleman could have been an incredible fighter. And Ponzinibbio, it's not a lack of training. It's like, how much did that illness set him back? Then you got Roman Delides, who's like Paul Craig, but his kicks actually matter. Actually, Paul Craig did box up Shogun, so there's that. Versus Laureano Staropoli, who mainly just sort of lunges at people with his chin out. If you watch that Salakov fight, it's so sloppy. Walt Harris versus Marcin Tybura, okay. De La Rosa versus Lipski, okay. Yeah, I mean, that's about it. Went short today, but I had already recorded it once, so I was livid. If you want to read the Advanced Striking 2.0 pieces, all the other stuff I write, support the podcast, be a boy, sign up to the Patreon. If you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing anytime, fightprimer.com. Go watch the new Filthy Casuals guide, and we will reconvene on Monday, hopefully after some kick-ass fights, for a longer, carefully recorded episode. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Check in your mics before you record, bless.